Hello everyone, my name is Mike and this is the Bored Cyborg. Today I'm doing something a bit different. I'm going to try something a bit different, I should say. What I want to do is a weekly series called What I've Watched, or What I've Watched Wednesdays. I don't know, that sounds kind of corny. Haven't decided yet. What I've Watched is definitely going to be in the title. And essentially what it is a video journal, a vlog, I suppose, of the films that I've watched in the past week. What I'll do is give my thoughts about them briefly, one by one, as well as a little bit of history or whatever little nuggets of knowledge I have about these films. And that's really it. This is my attempt at doing videos that don't require as much editing. This is going to be off the cuff, unscripted. Hopefully you guys like it. If you do, feel free to give me a thumbs up. That way I know to do more in the future. Let's have at it. So, growing up, one of the first genres I really resonated with that made me look at film as more of an art were gangster films. I grew up in New England, in Connecticut, near New York City, and I come from an Irish-Italian family, and so I was very fascinated with the mobsters and the gangsters. So the first film that I rewatched is a film from 1991 called Mobsters. Stay. This film was directed by, Michael Karbelnikoff. And he didn't really do any other work, from what I understand. What can I say about Mobsters? Mobsters is as if the creators of the film watched a whole bunch of Looney Tunes shorts with the old Italian mobsters and the Edward G. Robinson impersonations and took that as the word of how gangsters and mobsters actually act and made it into a live-action film. So it's not very good. It's not as fun as the Looney Tunes shorts. It's very popcorn feeling, and it's obviously banking on the success of The Untouchables, which came out a few years prior in '87, but it's nowhere near as good as The Untouchables. The cast is crazy. Christian Slater as Lucky Luciano, Patrick Dempsey as Meyer Lansky, Richard Grieco as Bugsy Siegel, and Cassius Mandalore as Frank Costello. Those guys, the real people, were actually some of the big gangsters during the Prohibition era, 30s and 40s. Yeah, the film's not that great, but it's in the collection because I'm nostalgic for it. There you go, Mobsters. Check it out if you like really obscure and not great gangster movies from the 90s. The next film is one of my favorite films of all time. It's in my I believe it's my 6th favorite film of all time. It's a film I've watched 20 times since I was in my late teens. I didn't get into anime until my late teens by a good friend named Darnell. He put me on to Akira. I had no idea that anime could get this crazy and this violent and this awesome. And it completely blew my mind and opened up a whole door of anime for me. Now I'm a huge anime fan, especially of a certain era, 70s, 80s, early 90s. But Akira came out in the year I was born, 1988. It's one of the greatest anime films ever made, one of the greatest animated films ever made, one of the greatest sci-fi films ever made, one of the greatest cyberpunk films ever made. It's got many distinctions and it deserves every single one of them. Written by Katsuhiro Otomo, who also did the manga a few years prior. It's one of the greatest. It has one of the greatest opening sequences, craziest, most intense taiko drum music, just pummeling your senses. The motorcycles are having basically a gang war in the middle of Tokyo, or Neo-Tokyo. It's violent, it's brutal, it's got nudity, cursing, blood, and I had no idea that animes could do that. So it was a big shock to me in my late teens. But it's one of my favorite films of all time now. Akira, and this is the version to have. This actually has the original English dub, redone English dub, and the Japanese dub. So Akira, man. 25th anniversary by Funimation. This is the version to have. I think I need water. Voice has been cracking a bit. After Akira, I just got this urge to watch fantasy films. And rewatch fantasy films, really. And the first one I chose was Ralph Bakshi's 1978 classic, The Lord of the Rings. This is the first attempt at putting The Lord of the Rings on the big screen, and Ralph Bakshi did it in '78, way before Peter Jackson did. And I know Peter Jackson saw this because there are some shots and angles and sequences that are almost identical in terms of framing or cinematography. So I know Jackson saw it, especially the shot of Gandalf plummeting down the gaping hole after being pulled down by Balrog. That shot is almost identical. Ralph Bakshi is an underrated animator, in my opinion, from New York, I believe. He's an American animator that was known for Fritz the Cat and like Coonskin and doing very controversial movies until he started doing things like this and Wizards and some films I love, just great animated fantasy films. He also did Cool World in '94 with Brad Pitt, which was a darker Roger Rabbit, nowhere near as good. It had the same kind of themes going on with live action and animated. This is one of his best. Might be my favorite film of Ralph Bakshi's. And if you haven't seen it and are a fan of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, you owe it to yourself to see this film. Some really revolutionary techniques with rotoscoping, combining like rotoscoped animation with hand-drawn. Like the Nazgul, for example, the ring wraiths are actual people, like shadowy figures in front of a camera, and they're animated. I don't know what rotoscoping really means. I know the effect, and this was doing it before He-Man. I know He-Man has some rotoscoping. This is actually an adaptation of the first 2 books, so Fellowship and Two Towers. It doesn't cover Return of the King. I really wish it did. I wish it was an hour longer, encompassed the entire trilogy of J.R.R. Tolkien. A great fantasy animated film from '78. Great Lord of the Rings movie. But yeah, Lord of the Rings, Ralph Bakshi, 1978. Check it out. So I followed that one up with a film that I thought came out later, but it didn't. It came out a year before Lord of the Rings, Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, and that's The Hobbit from 1977. This one's directed by Rankin and Bass. You may know Rankin and Bass from the plethora of Christmas classics, seminal Christmas classics like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Frosty the Snowman. They were the progenitors of the animated Christmas film in the 60s with claymation and hand-drawn animation. Santa Claus is Coming to Town, films like that. Films that we all, most of us probably grew up watching. This is their hand-drawn animation take on The Hobbit. It's got a very similar style to Bakshi's films, so I think Bakshi maybe pulled some inspiration from these, or they were inspired by Bakshi's animation style. But yeah, Rankin and Bass did this one, directed this one, and it's a good adaptation of the book. A really good adaptation. Got some catchy tunes, not as catchy as the live-action ones Peter Jackson did. It's 78 minutes long, so if you don't want to sit through 9.5, 10 hours of Peter Jackson's The Hobbit movies, you could just watch this and get the entire story in a nice, succinct way. By the way, I don't mind sitting through the Hobbit movies personally, but the more Middle-earth, the better for me. Check out The Hobbit if you're interested. It's got a good cast: Orson Bean, Richard Boone, John Huston, Otto Preminger, and some good music again. So check out 1977, The Hobbit, directed by Rankin and Bass. And the next film I watched was following suit, pretty much. Another Rankin and Bass film from one of the greatest years in cinematic history, 1982. Films like Blade Runner, E.T., and The Thing came out that year. The Last Unicorn also came out that year. I loved this film. It's a film about nature, and usually films with that subject matter hit home with me, resonate with me. Nausicaa is one of my favorite films of all time, my 5th favorite film of all time. It's about nature being destroyed or manipulated by man, and follows the last unicorn, who is voiced by Mia Farrow. Also has Jeff Bridges and Alan Arkin, some really good voice talent. Really good music by the folk country rock band America. The guys who did "Man Through the Desert on a Horse with No Name." Sorry, I have to close my eyes whenever I sing. And it also has some really bad music. The music that I absolutely hate, and this film dropped a couple points because of it, are the songs sung by Jeff Bridges and Mia Farrow. Now, Jeff Bridges and Mia Farrow are clearly, evidently, not vocalists. And those songs are supposed to be touching and poignant, and they're just grating, nails on a chalkboard type shit. Couldn't stand it, and it ripped me out of the film in the 3rd act. But it does round out nicely. Beautiful animation, some of the best that Rankin and Bass has ever done in terms of hand-drawn. So check it out if you like 80s animation, or just animation in general. The Last Unicorn. You probably saw this coming. I then went back to live action and followed The Last Unicorn up with The Hobbit, An Unexpected Journey. I adore An Unexpected Journey. I think it's comparable to the Lord of the Rings films. Not quite there. It's almost there. It just doesn't quite capture the magic of the originals. I was extremely hyped for this movie when it was coming out. And once I saw it, I was ecstatic. I absolutely loved it. And on rewatches, I still love it. My love for it grows stronger and stronger. A lot of it rests on the songs that, unfortunately, because fans hated them, were taken out of the sequels. The J.R.R. Tolkien books were littered and filled with hymns and chants and little bar songs and songs. Just songs that the dwarves sang, songs that the hobbits sang, and it really added a a layer to his books, and An Unexpected Journey has those songs. One of the greatest songs in any movie for me is the Misty Mountain song. I love that song. It's sung by the cast, by Richard Armitage and James Nesbitt, and the harmonies, it's one of the most impending, foreboding, poignant songs about the dwarves losing their home mountain, the Lonely Mountain. It just really sets the mood for the rest of the film. And the score is wonderful by Howard Shore. The moments with Bilbo and Thorin are tear-jerking for me, really. It's got some sequences that are so memorable. I love all the performances. I love all the dwarves. I love all the songs they sing. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates! Like, all that shit. I love it. Can't go wrong with An Unexpected Journey. But you could go somewhat wrong with its sequel, The Desolation of Smaug. Now, I still really like The Desolation of Smaug. The Mirkwood Forest sequence is one of the best in the series, in the Hobbit series, I think, with its disorienting, hypnotic, and mesmerizing kind of editing and camera work and sound design. It's really, really immersive and engrossing, and I love that sequence. And I even like the barrel sequence, especially Bombur when he's just tumbling down and smashing against the rocks, and the camera work is kind of tracking, and the sound design's going in and out depending on if we're underwater or not. It's got some really cool sound design, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. The dragon looks great, voiced by Benedict Cumberbatch. Gandalf's back being Gandalf. Not enough of Gandalf. There's never enough of Gandalf. It's not as memorable as An Unexpected Journey, but it's still a good sequel. It just kind of, you start feeling the writers stretching out the story, and it does take its toll. I didn't watch Five Armies because I haven't picked that up yet. I do like the film. I liked it when I saw it. I'm afraid on a rewatch it's not going to hold up as well. But I did like the film. I just don't own it in the extended version, or any version for that matter. I'd like to at some point. All right, and lastly is one of my favorite films of all time. I love this movie. The Fellowship of the Ring, Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson, 2001. I can't believe it's been 17, 18 years since this movie came out. It's one of those films, I didn't see this in theaters, but I was 13 years old. My father rented it, we rented it, brought it back home and watched it on VHS. And I was completely enamored, completely immersed in this world. It was my first exposure to the world of Middle-earth, and it swept me away, quite literally. I remember crying, even as a kid. The Shire music still gets me to this day. It's some of the most beautiful music in any film. Howard Shore's score is so memorable. Equally as memorable as Star Wars, in my opinion, John Williams. I can remember the Uruk-hai's march. I can remember the Shire song. I can remember Gandalf, all the music. It's one of those films I remember where I was, the setting, with my father watching this movie. He was on one side of the bed, I was on the other. It's just one of those that just completely blew me away. I had no idea what I was getting into. And I'll never forget the first time I watched it. Sort of like the first time I watched The Matrix and Star Wars. You never forget those times. And The Fellowship of the Ring is a perfect film. My favorite of the three. I think all are perfect. All of them are perfect films, but my favorite of the three is Fellowship of the Ring. This viewing actually made me realize the importance of the hobbits as characters. Just like all of us, in all humans there's a hobbit. And I know it sounds cheesy, but the hobbits love home. They love a home-cooked meal. They love family. They love nature, the world. That really spoke to me this time around. I cry at many times in this movie, just a lot of emotional parts for me. But that realization just made it really click and made me fall in love with the hobbits even more and what they represent as characters. And it's such an important film and has a lot to say and is just one of the most fantastic movies ever made. Love it. I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours. The extended version adds so many great scenes to these movies. If you haven't seen them, watch the extended versions. That's the first episode of What I've Watched. So if you guys like this type of video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments so that I can continue doing these types of videos. They're easier to do. They take less time editing-wise, so I could do one a week easily. So just let me know. And also let me know what you felt about these films, if you've seen them, your thoughts on them, things like that, any trivia you may know. I always like trivia. So leave that in the comments below. And if you're new to this channel and like what you saw, go ahead and hit subscribe, as well as the little bell for notifications to be notified when I do release a new video. Otherwise, that's about it, and I'll see you next time. Bored Cyborg, out.